The young man bet his friends 100 coins that he could pick up a RoyalGuard like a sandbag and carry him 3 steps across the forecourt, and I watched him sling his gym bag onto the cobblestones and roll his shoulders like a man stepping into a ring. I was old even then, 20 paces back along the gilded railing, my own post long behind me, and I knew the boy at the sentry box. His name was Halden. He was the steadiest man I ever served beside, and I had a feeling, watching that bag hit the stones, that the steadiness was about to be tested in a way no drill had ever prepared him for. I should tell you who I am, because the rest of this only matters if you understand the kind of man Halden was, and the kind of men we were trained to be. They call me Sergeant now, though I have not worn the tunic in years. I served the House of Varon for 31 winters, the last 9 of them on the forecourt of the Greywater Palace, and Halden came up under me when he was barely past boyhood, all elbows and eagerness, the only recruit I ever had to teach to stand still rather than to move. Most men cannot bear stillness. They fidget, they sway, they let their eyes drift to the pretty faces in the crowd. Halden learned it the way some men learn to pray. By the time he took the box that morning, he could hold a position for 2 hours in summer heat without so much as a swallow. And he could do it because somewhere behind that flawless face, he had decided that his stillness was not weakness pretending to be patience. It was patience pretending to be a statue. There is a difference, and the boy with the gym bag was about to learn it. I had come that morning only to watch, an old man's habit. You give your life to a place and you cannot stop returning to it, the way a sailor walks the docks long after the sea has finished with him. I bought a paper cone of roasted nuts from the vendor by the east gate, and I stood where the railing curves, and I watched the tourists gather in their loose, shuffling rings, phones lifted, waiting for the changing of the watch. And I watched the young man with the bare, sun-browned arms and the tight white shirt circle Halden's box twice, sizing him up, the way a buyer circles a horse. He was a big lad, I will give him that. Broad through the chest, thick in the neck, the kind of body a man builds when he has nothing harder in his life to wrestle than a barbell. His friends, 3 of them, soft-handed, loud, egged him from the rope line, and one of them was filming before the boy had even decided to do it, which tells you the whole thing was planned. They had come to make a little film of a strong man humiliating a still one. They had come for the click. "Watch this," the big one said, and he set his feet. Halden did not look at him. That is the first thing you must understand. Halden's eyes were forward, fixed on a point above the crowd that only he could see, and his rifle was at the slope, and his white gloves were spotless, and his face beneath the tall black bearskin might have been carved that morning out of the same pale stone as the palace wall. He had heard the bet. We hear everything. People believe the silence means we are deaf or stupid or asleep on our feet, and the belief is a gift because it makes the proud careless. Halden had heard every word, and he had already decided, in that long, quiet country behind his eyes, exactly how far he would let this go, and not 1 inch farther. The big one stepped in close, too close. He put his face near Halden's and grinned for the camera, and the crowd made that low, delighted, nervous sound a crowd makes when it senses someone is about to do a thing he should not. "Don't worry, soldier," the young man said, loud, performing. "I'll put you back." And then he reached out and laid both his big hands flat on Halden's chest. I felt my own jaw tighten 20 paces away. There is a line in this work, an old line, older than any of us, and the line is the uniform itself. A man may shout at a guard, may mock him, may wave his phone an inch from his nose, and the guard will hold, because words are wind and the discipline is built to outlast wind. But hands are different. The moment a man puts his hands on a sentry of the house, he has stopped being a fool and become a problem, and the whole long architecture of restraint that holds a guard in place stops being a cage and becomes a coiled spring. The crowd did not know this. The big young man did not know this. He only felt warm wool and brass buttons under his palms and a body that did not move, and he laughed, because he thought the not moving was the joke. He set his feet wider. He bent his knees. He wrapped those thick arms around Halden's middle, pinning the rifle, and he hauled. I have seen strong men try to lift loaded sledges off the ice. I have seen a farrier lift the hind quarter of a draft horse. This was that kind of effort. The young man's face went red. The cord stood out in his neck. His friends howled with laughter, and the phone caught all of it. And Halden did not move. Not a stagger, not a slide, not a shuffle of one polished boot on the cobblestone. The boy heaved a second time, grunting now, the laughter behind him curdling into something less certain, and still the guard stood like a thing rooted under the stones, like the palace had grown him there. You want to know how a man does that? I taught him how. You drop your weight. You think it down through your hips into the soles of your feet and out into the earth, and you let the other man spend his strength against the planet instead of against you, because no gym in the world builds a back strong enough to lift the ground. The boy was not lifting Halden. He was trying to lift Greywater Palace by its bones, and the palace does not come up. The third heave was the one that turned it. The young man, embarrassed now, angry the way only an embarrassed man gets, abandoned the lift and shoved instead both hands, full weight, driving up under the chin strap toward Halden's throat, the way you shove a door that is stuck. It was no longer a prank. A prank does not reach for a man's neck. The crowd saw it too. The delighted sound died in their throats, and somewhere a woman said, "Oh, that's enough," in the small, horrified voice of someone watching a thing tip over. And in the half-second that the shove landed, I saw the long, quiet country behind Halden's eyes go still in a different way. Not the stillness of patience, the stillness of decision. He had let it go exactly as far as he meant to, not 1 inch farther. What happened next took less time than it will take me to tell you, and every part of it was something he had drilled 1,000 times in a cold yard before dawn, while boys like this one slept. But before I tell you how a disciplined man answers a pair of hands at his throat, answers them so cleanly that not a drop of blood is spilled and not a button is torn, I have to tell you what was waiting at the edge of that forecourt, watching, that none of them had seen. Because the young man with the gym bag had not only chosen the wrong guard, he had chosen the worst possible morning to choose him. At the far end of the forecourt, beyond the rope line, beyond the gilded railing where I stood with my paper cone of nuts gone cold in my hand, a small group had come out from the equerry's door to take the morning air. I had marked them when they arrived, because old habits never leave a man, and I count everyone who enters a forecourt as a matter of reflex. Among them was a tall, gray, plain-coated man with a stillness about him that no civilian ever wears, the kind of stillness that comes from a life spent giving orders that are obeyed before they are finished. I knew him. Most of the kingdom would not have. He held no flashy title, and his name was not in the broadsheets, but he had commanded the regiment that Halden and I both came up through, and there was not a man in that uniform who would not have walked into fire on his nod. He had stepped out for air, and now he was watching the forecourt the way I was watching it, and I saw his chin lift a half-inch as the young man's hands found Halden's throat. That is the thing the boy and his laughing friends could not see. They thought they were alone with a statue and a phone. They were performing for 100 strangers and 3 handlers and 1 old sergeant, and for the one man in the kingdom least likely to find any of it amusing. The morning had set a trap, and the boy had walked into the center of it grinning. But all of that was at the edges, and I am getting ahead of the half-second that mattered. The shove came in. I told you a guard's restraint stops being a cage the instant hands close on his throat, and now you will see what I meant. Halden did not rear back. He did not shout, did not swing, did not do any of the loud, flailing things a frightened man does, because Halden was not frightened and had not been frightened of anything in years. What he did was smaller and far more total. He simply stopped being where the hands expected him to be. His left boot slid back 4 inches, no more, and his shoulders turned a quarter, and the young man's driving weight, which had been aimed at a throat, met empty air and the beginning of a fall. The boy lurched forward off his own force the way A man lurches when a door he is shoving is suddenly pulled open from the other side. And as he came, Halden's right hand left the rifle. The rifle came up and across his own body in the same motion, kept close, never swung as a weapon, because a guard does not use the king's rifle to strike a fool, and that white-gloved hand closed over the back of the young man's reaching wrist. I have watched 100 men learn this lock, and I have never seen it done cleaner. Thumb to the back of the hand, fingers wrapping the heel of the palm, and a turn, not a wrench, not a jerk, a turn, smooth as a key in an oiled lock, that rolled the boy's wrist over and folded his own arm against itself until the elbow had nowhere to go but up and the shoulder had nowhere to go but down. It is a thing called control, and the beauty of it, the terrible quiet beauty, is that it does not hurt the man who does not fight it, and it makes the man who does fight it teach himself the lesson. The harder the boy pulled, the more his own strength closed the trap. All that Jim-built muscle, all those thick cords in the neck, and none of it could find a single direction to push that did not run straight into the joint's own stop. The big young man went down to one knee on the cobblestones. He did not so much fall as discover that the floor was the only place left to put himself. His grin was gone. His face, so red a moment before from heaving, had gone a pale, surprised gray, and his mouth opened and shut on a sound that did not come. His friend stopped laughing. The phone, I noticed, kept filming, because the soft-handed boy holding it had frozen and forgotten he was even holding a thing. And Halden's eyes were still forward. That is what undid the crowd, I think, what they talked about for days after. He had a grown man folded to his knee at the end of one gloved hand, and his face had not changed at all. He had not looked down. He had not looked at the boy or the friends or the camera. He looked at the same point above the heads of the crowd that he had been looking at all morning, as if a man kneeling at the end of his arm were no different from a sparrow that had landed on the railing, and the not looking was somehow more frightening than any glare could have been. It said, "This costs me nothing." It said, "I could do this all day." It said, without a word, "You have not even reached the edge of what I have been trained to hold back, and you never will, because I will not let you." "Easy," Halden said, the first word he had spoken, low, even almost gentle. "Stop pulling and it stops hurting. Pull again and it won't." The boy stopped pulling. It was over, in the way a thing is over when the dangerous part has passed, but it was not finished, and Halden knew the difference better than anyone alive. A guard who controls a man and then simply lets him go has done half a job and made a future enemy. The boy had laid hands on the throat of a sentry of the house in front of 100 witnesses. That is not a thing you brush off the wool and forget. There is a protocol for it, an old and careful one, and the whole point of the protocol is that it takes the matter out of the hands of the two men involved, out of pride, out of anger, out of the temptation to teach a harder lesson than the law allows, and puts it into the cold, fair machinery of the gate. So Halden held the lock light now, no more pressure than it took to keep the boy honest, and he turned his head a precise few degrees toward the sentry box, and he said, in the carrying parade voice we are all taught, the voice that reaches 100 yards without seeming to shout, "Gate, hands on a sentry, forecourt north box." I felt the words land in my own chest like a drumbeat from 30 years gone, and along the colonnade, where the relief watch waited in the shadow of the arch, I saw two of them peel off the wall and start across the stones at the fast, flat, unhurried walk that means business. And I knew the boy's morning, the morning he had planned as a 100-coin joke for his 3 friends and his little film, had just stopped belonging to him entirely. But it was the gray, plain-coated man at the far end of the forecourt who moved next, and it was his moving that turned this from a story about a foolish boy into a story I have told for 20 years, because he did not hurry. He did not need to. He simply began to walk toward the north box with his hands folded behind his back, and the equerry beside him went pale and fell in a step behind. And the gate guards, the two who were already crossing, saw who was coming and changed, mid-stride, from men, answering a call to men standing aside for their colonel. And the young man on his knee, who still did not understand anything that was happening, looked up at last from the white glove that held him and saw a quiet gray man bearing down on him across an emptying forecourt, and asked, in a small voice, the first sensible question he had asked all morning. "Who is that?" Nobody answered him. "We don't in that uniform. But I will answer it for you because the answer is the whole hinge of the thing." The gray man was the colonel of the regiment, retired in name, the way I am retired, which is to say not at all where it counts. He had spent 40 years inside the discipline that the boy had just tried to lift off the cobblestones for a laugh, and he had buried men who died holding that discipline, and he held a single principle above every other in his long, hard life, that the uniform protects the kingdom only so long as the kingdom protects the uniform. A guard who can be manhandled for a video is a guard who can be tested, and a guard who can be tested is a door that has been tried, and a door that has been tried will eventually be forced. He had watched the whole of it from the equerry's step. He had seen the hands go to the throat, and he had decided, somewhere in the half-second that Haldon decided, that this boy was going to learn the full weight of what he had touched. He stopped 3 feet from the kneeling young man and looked at him for a long moment without expression, the way you look at a stain on a thing you care about. Then he looked at Haldon, and the smallest thing happened. The corner of the colonel's mouth moved, not into a smile, but into the thing a hard man does instead of a smile when one of his own has done it right. And Haldon, who had not looked down at the boy, looked at the colonel, and the two of them had an entire conversation in the half-instant their eyes met, the kind of conversation only men who have stood the same watch can have without words. "I have him," Haldon's stillness said. "Hold him," the colonel's nod answered. "The gate has it now." "Guardsmen," the colonel said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The forecourt had gone so quiet you could hear the pigeons in the colonnade. "You may release him to the gate." The 2 relief guards had reached the box. They were younger men, and I saw the eagerness in them, the heat a young guard feels when one of the brotherhood has been laid hands on. And I will tell you that the most impressive thing in that whole forecourt was not Haldon's lock and was not the colonel's arrival. It was the way those 2 young men put the heat away. They had been raised in the same discipline. They took the boy from Haldon's control with a procedure so practiced it looked like courtesy, one hand to the same wrist, the lock transferred without a gap, the boy brought up off his knee to his feet not roughly but inexorably, the way a tide brings a boat off a sandbar. No one struck him. No one even raised a voice. The cuffs that closed around his wrists made a small bright sound in the silence, 2 clicks, and that was the loudest violence the entire morning ever produced. The boy found his voice again as the metal closed. "It was a joke," he said. "It was a prank, that's all. It was just a—" And his eyes went to the phone, to the friend still frozen with the phone, as if the little film he had wanted so badly could now somehow be entered in his defense, as if the camera that had come to prove he was strong could be made to prove he was innocent. "I know what it was," the colonel said, "and here is the part I have turned over in my mind for 20 years because it is the part that separates this work from mere force." He did not gloat. He did not lean in and savor it. A smaller man, a man who had not earned the gray in his hair, would have made a speech. The colonel did the opposite. He spoke to the boy plainly, almost kindly, the way you speak to someone you have given up on convincing but not yet given up on entirely. "You came here thinking the worst that could happen was that you would look foolish," he said. "You thought the man behind you was a costume with a person standing in it, that the stillness was the whole of him, that there was nothing underneath but a fellow being paid to hold a pose while you and your friends had your fun. You were wrong about every part of that. The stillness is not the absence of a man. It is the discipline of one. And the only reason you are walking off this forecourt on your own 2 feet, with your teeth in your head and your arm in its socket, is that the man you put your hands on has more discipline and has held breath than you have in your whole body." The boy said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You will go to the gatehouse," the colonel went on, "and you will give your name and the matter will go where such matters go, not because we are angry. We are not angry. Anger is a thing we have trained out of ourselves, which is more than you managed this morning. You will go because there is a line and you crossed it, and a line that is not held is not a line. That is all. That is the whole of it. He paused. Take him. And they took him. Down the long edge of the forecourt toward the squat stone gatehouse, between the two young guards, his three friends trailing behind him in a stunned little knot, the soft-handed one still holding the phone but no longer filming, the bravado of the morning leaking out of all four of them with every step, until they looked like exactly what they were, which was four very young men who had made a very large mistake in a very public place, and were only now, far too late, beginning to understand the size of it. I will tell you what happened in the gatehouse because it matters, and because it is not the cruel thing the crowd half hoped for, and not the soft thing the sentimental might wish. The boy's name was taken. The film was viewed. The friend gave up the phone the moment he was asked. All his loyalty to the prank evaporated, and the film showed exactly what had happened, which is to say it showed a young man laying both hands on the throat of a sentry of the house, and it showed that same sentry controlling him with a single hold and harming him not at all. The film, which had been made to humiliate a guard, became the clearest possible proof of the guard's restraint. There is a justice in that so clean it almost makes you believe the world is fair. But the gatehouse was not where the real reckoning happened. The real reckoning had already happened, out on the stones. In the half-second the boy felt his own enormous strength fold against itself and discovered that the still man he had come to lift was the immovable thing, and he was the one who could be moved. You cannot unknow that. I have watched proud men learn it, and they are never the same proud men afterward. Some of them get smaller. A few, the better few, get larger in a way that has nothing to do with the gym, because they finally understand the difference between strength and force, between a man who can lift a weight and a man who can hold a line. And out at the north box, before the dust of the whole affair had even settled, before the crowd had finished its astonished murmuring, Halden did the thing that I have never been able to describe to anyone who was not there to see it, the thing that I think is the truest picture of what we are. He stepped his left boot forward the 4 inches it had slid back. He brought the rifle down to the slope. He squared his shoulders under the bearskin, and he lifted his eyes once more to the point above the crowd that only he could see. And he stood his post, as if none of it had happened at all. That more than the lock, more than the cuffs, more than the colonel's quiet words, is what I want you to carry away from this. The crowd had just watched a grown man brought to his knee and led off in irons, and the soldier who had done it returned to perfect stillness within the same minute, no flush of triumph in his face, no glance at the cameras now turned hungrily upon him, no acknowledgement of the murmur of admiration washing across the rope line. He was not performing humility. He simply did not count what he had done as anything worth a flush of triumph. He had held a line. The line was a thing he held every hour of every watch, and it had been tested, and it had held, and now there were 3 hours and 40 minutes left on his shift, and a guard does not celebrate the middle of his shift. I came up off the railing then. I left my paper cone of cold nuts on the post for the pigeons, and I walked along the inside of the rope toward the equerry's door, because the colonel had turned away from the gatehouse and was coming back across the stones, and I wanted an old man's foolishness. I wanted to stand near him for a moment, the way you stand near a fire on a cold day, just to feel the warmth of a thing you used to belong to. He saw me coming. Of course he did. He had counted me into the forecourt the same way I had counted him. He stopped, and he looked at me a long moment with those flat gray eyes, and then something in them eased. "Sergeant," he said. "Colonel." We stood, 2 old men beside a railing, the crowd flowing past us none the wiser, the great pale wall of gray water rising behind, and out at the north box the boy I had trained holding his stillness like a held note. "You taught him that hold," the colonel said. "It was not a question." "I taught him the hold," I said. "I did not teach him the rest of it. A man can be taught a hold in an afternoon. The rest of it, I lifted my chin toward the box, toward Halden standing as if carved. The rest of it you cannot teach. You can only set the conditions and wait to see whether it grows. The colonel nodded slowly. It grew. It grew, I agreed, and to my own surprise my throat tightened on the two small words, because I had spent 31 winters setting those conditions in boy after boy and watching most of them learn only the hold and never the rest. And here, on this ordinary morning, on this ordinary forecourt, with a paper cone of nuts going cold and a foolish young man being walked to a gatehouse, one of them had shown me the rest of it in a single clean half-second, and I had been there to see it. Not every old man gets to see his work stand up and breathe. I had just seen mine. You know what he could have done, the colonel said quietly, and now we were two veterans speaking the language only veterans speak. A man with that boy's wrist in that lock and that boy's hands fresh off his throat. The thing could have ended very differently and no court in the kingdom would have called it wrong. A torn shoulder, a broken wrist, a face put into the cobblestones. Force answered with force, and every man watching would have nodded and said the fool had it coming. He would have, I said, he would have had it coming. And it would have been the wrong thing, the colonel said. Do you understand why? I did, but I let the old man say it, because some things want saying out loud, and because there are not many left who can. Because the uniform is not a weapon, he said, it is a promise. It says to every soul who passes these gates, here stands a man who will not be moved, and who will not move against you unless you make him, and even then no further than he must. The day a guard breaks a fool's arm for a prank is the day the promise becomes a threat, and a kingdom that is guarded by threats is not guarded at all. It is merely occupied. The whole of our discipline, every cold dawn of it, every hour of stillness you and I have ever stood, it is all in service of that one promise. Halden kept the promise. He kept it with a man's hands at his throat. That is the hardest place in the world to keep it, and he kept it without even seeming to try. He let out a long breath through his nose. That is what you grew, Sergeant, not a fighter. A man who knew the exact size of what he was allowed to do, and did not do 1 ounce more of it, with every excuse in the world to do worse. There is no rarer thing on this earth. I have carried those words for 20 years. I am carrying them now to you. The story did not end at the gatehouse, and I would be cheating you if I pretended it did, because the truest part came later, and it came from the boy. It was 3 weeks after, on a gray morning with a thin rain coming off the wall, and the forecourt was nearly empty, the tourists thinned by the weather. I had come, as I always come, and I saw him before he saw me, the big young man, recognizable even at a distance by the breadth of him, though something in the way he carried it had changed. He came alone. No friends, no phone, no swagger. He came to the rope line opposite the north box, where Halden, for it was Halden's watch again, the rotation had brought him round, stood in the rain with the water beating on the bearskin and running off the brim and not one muscle of him acknowledging the wet. The boy stood at the rope a long time. I drifted closer, the way an old man can drift unnoticed, and I watched him work himself up to a thing that was plainly costing him more courage than the prank ever had. Anyone can be brave with 3 friends and a camera. It takes a different and rarer kind to come back alone, in the rain, with nothing to gain and nothing to film, to a place where you were shamed. Finally he spoke, not loud, just loud enough to carry across the wet stones to the box. I came to say I'm sorry, the young man said. Halden did not answer. He could not answer. He was on his watch, and a guard on his watch does not hold conversations across a rope line, not for an apology, not for anything short of the wrong sensed or the order given. The boy knew that now. You could see that he knew it. He was not waiting for an answer. He had come to say a thing not to be answered, and there is a great growing up hidden in the difference. I told myself it was harmless, the boy went on, and the rain ran down his face and he let it. I told myself you were just standing there, that it didn't mean anything to you, that I could put my hands on you and it would just be a laugh and we'd both forget it. I had it completely backwards. It meant nothing to me and everything to you, and I had that exactly backwards." He swallowed. "The thing I keep coming back to isn't that you put me down. I've been put down before. I lift, I spar, I've lost. It's that you didn't hurt me. You had me, I felt it. I felt that there was nothing I could do, not one thing. All the strength I'm so proud of, and it was just gone. You'd taken it without taking anything. And you could have done whatever you wanted to me, and you did the smallest possible thing instead. You held me exactly as hard as you had to, and not one bit harder. And then you just—" he gestured helplessly at the still figure in the rain. "You just went back to standing there, like I wasn't even worth being angry at." He was quiet a moment. "I didn't understand any of it that day," he said. "I think I'm starting to now. I went to the gatehouse and I told them what I'd done, and I took what came, and it was fair. All of it was fair, and not one person there was unkind to me, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time." A small, broken laugh. "I bought a barbell because I wanted to be strong. I came here to prove I was strong. And the strongest thing I saw all year was a man who didn't move and didn't get angry and didn't hurt me when he had every right to. I don't even know how to want that yet, but I know it's real because I felt it close around my wrist." And here Halden did a thing that I will carry beside the Colonel's words for whatever years I have left. He did not turn his head. He did not break his watch. He did not speak, for he could not, and he would not have if he could. But the relief was due. I heard the relief party stepping off under the colonnade, the flat, unhurried tread of the changing of the watch, and as the new guard came up to take the box, in the few seconds of the changeover when the post passes from one man to the next and a sentry is, for one breath, simply a man again, Halden brought his white-gloved hand up and across his body and laid 2 fingers briefly against the brim of the bearskin in the smallest fraction of a salute. To the boy. In the rain. There and gone in less than a second, so quick that most of the thin crowd missed it entirely. And then he turned with the changeover and marched off under the arch and was a statue again, gone into the colonnade's shadow. It was not a salute a guard owes a civilian. It was not in any protocol I ever taught. It was a thing one man gives another when he has seen him do a hard thing, when he has watched him come back alone in the rain to a place of his own shame and say a true word with nothing to gain by it. It said, "I saw you come back. I saw what it cost. We are square." It is the only time in 31 winters and 20 years of watching after that I ever saw a guard of the house answer an apology, and he did it without a word and without a step out of line, in the one heartbeat the rules allowed, and not 1 ounce more than that. The boy stood at the rope a moment longer. Then he nodded once to the empty box, and he pulled his collar up against the rain, and he walked out the way he had come, alone, quiet, smaller in the way the foolish get smaller and larger in the way the wiser grow, both at once, which is exactly the right size for a young man to be when he has just learned the thing it takes most men a lifetime to learn, if they learn it at all. I never saw him again. I have wondered now and then what became of him, whether the lesson stuck, whether he kept lifting, whether he ever told the story on himself the way I am telling it on him now. I like to think he did. I like to think that somewhere there is a steady grown man who once tried to carry a guard 3 steps across a forecourt for 100 coins, and who tells it as the morning he found out what strength actually was. But I do not know, and it does not finally matter, because the lesson was never really his to keep or lose. The lesson was Halden's, and the lesson was the regiment's, and now, I suppose, the lesson is yours. People ask me when I tell this, whether I was not afraid for the boy, with his hands at a soldier's throat, and that soldier trained to end men. And I tell them they have it backwards, the same way the boy had it backwards. The boy was never in any danger from Halden's training. He was only ever in danger from his own, from the soft, untested notion that strength is a thing you build in a gym and prove on a stranger, that a still man is a weak man, that a uniform is a costume and the person inside it does not count. That is the dangerous thing. The discipline of the guard is the safest thing in the kingdom precisely because it will not be moved and will not move further than it must. The danger was never the man who held the line. The danger is always only the man who has never learned there is a line at all. I think about that half-second on the cobblestones more than a man my age should think about anything. The boy's full strength, his whole proud body thrown against Halden, and Halden simply not being where the strength expected him, the white glove closing, the smooth turn of the wrist, the knee finding the stone, and then the stillness, the eyes forward, the small even words. Stop pulling and it stops hurting. I have decided in my old age that this is the whole of what we were for. Not to fight, not to win. To hold a line so exactly, with so much held back, that the man who throws himself against it teaches himself the only lesson worth learning, and walks away whole enough to learn it. Halden retired some years after me. He keeps bees now, I'm told, on a hillside a long way from any palace, and I am told he is as still over the hives as he ever was over the forecourt, and I believe it. Some men carry the stillness out of the uniform with them. It was never the uniform that made it. The colonel is gone these 3 years, and I stood his last watch myself, in a manner of speaking, the only old guard left who remembered the morning of the gym bag and the 100-coin bet, and the wrist that folded against its own strength. And I am the one telling it now because someone has to, because the boy with the barbell needs his story told true, and because the young men coming up, the ones learning the hold this very dawn in some cold yard before the light, need to hear, from an old man who was there, that the hold is the easy part. The hard part is everything Halden did after the hold, the not looking down, the small even voice, the hand that held exactly as hard as it had to and not 1 ounce harder, the going back to stillness as if nothing had happened, the 2 fingers to the brim 3 weeks later in the rain. That is the rest of it. That is the part you cannot teach. You can only set the conditions and wait and hope. And if you are very lucky, once or twice in a long life, on an ordinary morning when you came only to watch, you get to see it stand up in a young man's body and breathe. I saw it. I was there. And I have stood a little straighter every day since, knowing the line still holds held by men who could do far worse, and choose every cold dawn of their lives to do exactly, precisely, only what they must.